Okay, here we are. Long last. This is the last lecture. Yesterday would have been the final exam, but the consensus was from the students I spoke to that having the weekend to study a little bit more was better anyway. And I've been struggling with colds, ear infections, flu, and everything this semester. So trying to just trying to speak clearly so that you can understand me on this video is one of the reasons that I didn't record earlier this week. But let's see what we can do here. The previous video is already uploaded. It should have been available on Thursday. So please watch that one first. And then this is the final one. Like I said, this is just covering the back half of chapter 7. This discussion about the government here is not in the textbook exactly. So pay particular attention. Hold on, let me get a marker here. You notice I do my YouTube videos exactly how I do my lectures. I'm not sure where anything is. Be careful not to forget. This is a really essential part of how the American government works. And maybe I'll start with that because it isn't really explicitly in the book. And if it is, any references to it aren't really good explanations. So I want to say, it looks like a triangle, essentially. Triangle is a very balanced shape. So you will see on American dollar bills, you will see a triangle with an I in it. And exactly that means we won't get into because we're out of time. But yeah, lots of people speculate that there is some hidden meaning behind the I in the center of the triangle. But really, originally when the Declaration of Independence, just to clarify, one of the students pointed out I made an error in the quiz. There's a big difference between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence was wasn't just. It was a document that argued that America needed to be independent. It had the right to do that, and that the oppression of the British Empire needed to be ended, if by force, if necessary, in order to have for the country, in order for the 13 colonies to make a country that had the values, the main values of the American society, namely life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right now, that's not on the exam. That particular those particular words. However, when the Constitution was created, the problem was they needed to make a government. In the beginning, the government actually didn't have any political parties. There was just George Washington. Okay? We talked about him a lot. It was basically everybody voted for George Washington, and when he decided to do a second term, everybody voted for him again. And after he finished his second term, he decided it was time to retire. He was not interested in being a king, so he retired, and that set the precedent of 2-term presidencies. That was not a law or a rule until several hundred years later, when this guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided to do 4 terms, and then after he was done, they decided that the limit would be only twice. Okay, so the Constitution has had dozens of amendments. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, some of them you may be familiar with, but this is not a political science class. But what you do need to know is that the executive branch includes the president and the vice president. And gradually, just like a king in England, the way the king now is not even a president. The prime minister is the executive of the British state. So Winston Churchill in World War II And in World War II, in the book, you'll notice there's a short little page mentioning Winston Churchill there. That might be on the exam, so don't forget. At one point in World War II, it was just the British against the Nazis, and Winston Churchill was the leader. I already said he's an imperialist, and he's not necessarily his opinions about empire have not really aged well. So he's a brilliant speaker, and he did stop the Germans from conquering all of Europe, and very important historical figure. But yeah, if you look at his attitude and his ideology, you might, especially if you're from a country that was a colony, you might not like his perspective. Let's put it that way. So now the British have a system called a constitutional monarchy, where the king is just a symbol and the prime minister occupies this, and there's an upper and a lower house. The British have the House of Lords, the upper house. I put it backwards, but the upper house is the House of Lords. But in England, the House of Lords is just a rubber stamper. They don't actually really do anything. Everything happens in the House. Just like in Korea, there's only one house, and the representatives are the Congress, and they make the laws, and they work together with the president. Now, sometimes there's different parties and different people in the legislative branch, and they disagree with the president, which you've seen happen recently in Korea. The reason is because the opposition party has more seats. So there's a lot of disagreement. The same thing is true with Biden right now, is the Republicans have more seats than Joe Biden does, his party. So if he's going to get anything done, he has to get some of the opposition party, some of the Republicans have to agree with him. So they have to come up with issues that both sides will vote on. That's called bipartisanship. And during World War II and post-World War II, when FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower were presidents, that's often what happened. The Republicans and the Democrats, there were a lot of issues they agreed on. They argued about many things, but nowadays the problem is the two main parties in Korea and in America can't agree on anything. And this creates a sort of deadlock in the government. But however, I know, and this is a contradiction, because government's supposed to function for the people, but this triangle here, the judicial branch with the Supreme Court, when the people disagree with what the president is doing, or the legislative branch disagrees with the president, or the judges disagree with the legislature, whatever, if there's a disagreement, they have the ability to block each other. And right now, what's potentially scary or potentially good, depending on how well Donald Trump runs the country from January 20th, is that the judicial branch is a right-leaning conservative group of judges. The Senate is a Republican Senate. It's a majority Senate. They have the control of the House. They have control of the whole triangle. So now when this happens, it's difficult to stop a lot of things if you disagree, or even if a lot of the population disagrees with what the president says, this is called a mandate, is that they have been given control of all the branches of the government. Therefore, there's not very many, political ways or legal ways. There's a limited number of things that they can do to prevent the president from doing things that are unpopular. If the president is doing a great job, I think there's not a problem. But this has happened in Canada too, where basically the leader, the prime minister, both houses and the judicial branch have all been sort of liberal. And in our case, it wasn't terrible because the prime minister was a competent leader, but there were dissatisfied people. You don't want it kind of split half and half though, so you can't get anything done. So this is the whole idea: is that we don't want a king. We don't want Henry II running around. We don't want Henry VIII running around killing people he doesn't like all the time. This is 2024, so the government is modeled on this system of checks and balances, which means it's supposed to be balanced. It's supposed to function though, and if it's too balanced, then nothing can get done. So there needs to be a willingness, for the government to cooperate. You can't have all of this partisanship politics where nobody will compromise. And these days, I think politics are a problem that way in many countries, not just Canada, Korea, and America, which I'm familiar with, but I've heard lots of. France has recently had a lot of trouble trying to get the political parties to cooperate on anything, which is causing a lot of frustration. Okay? So this is the American system, essentially. The special relationship is an expression. It's directly involved with the fact that during World War II, the British were alone and the Americans started to support them. And originally they didn't want to get involved, but once they started fighting Japan and Germany declared war on them, the United States and the United Kingdom cooperated very closely. The same thing happened in World War One, probably because of the cultural similarities and because of the, linguistic, the communication advantages of using the same language. There was closer cooperation with England and with the United Kingdom and United States than with France, but they certainly supported France as well. But in World War II, France was defeated, so it was really the British and the Canadians and the Americans working together. Surprisingly, though, Canadian English and American English and British English are different enough that there was a translation book for American slang, and somebody from Texas can't really understand somebody from Manchester, and somebody from Newfoundland or Manitoba can't understand somebody from Florida. Ironically, even though they're speaking the same language, is tough when you're yelling at each other on the battlefield, I suppose. So the special relationship is that continued sort of, like we've heard Trump say, I'm going to put all these taxes on China, I'm going to put all these taxes on Mexico, and I'm going to put tariffs on Canada. Has anybody heard anything about him saying, I'm going to tax the crap out of the United Kingdom? So excuse my language, but I haven't heard him say anything about taxing the United Kingdom. He was over there sitting with the prince the other day, visiting with the prime minister. I didn't hear him say anything about, I'm going to put 50% tax on all United Kingdom goods. Why is that? I mean, they still, even though we started this we didn't start this course in this second semester, but shortly after we talked about the colonial period, there was a war, but it was really a gentleman's war. I told you, at Yorktown, the general handed over his sword, and they allowed them to keep their weapons, and they marched down the road and onto the boats and sent them back. And the American economic relationship with the United Kingdom, the political relationship, continued to be mostly positive, except for a war in 1812, but up and down, but generally has continued to be very strong, to the great disappointment of the French, who helped America become independent. Okay, so now this brings us to sort of the end of the part. You don't have to do chapter 8, remember? So I'm just going to talk about these guys one by one. I chose these presidents not because they're my favorite, although I'm going to say Lincoln is my favorite president, easily. Um, After that, it becomes tougher to choose. Um, FDR is a possibility. Eisenhower is a possibility too. But Lincoln is, for me, um, the president who I admire the most, in all sort of aspects. There's nobody, I think, who comes close in the 20th century to FDR. And if you're going to argue who was the best president in the 19th century, you got Lincoln, and I suppose it's George Washington the century before that. So, if I was gonna do my Mount Rushmore, I'd have George Washington and Lincoln up there, just like there should be. I'd kick Jefferson off, and probably put Benjamin Franklin there, even though he's not a president. I just thought he was much more deserving, and Theodore Roosevelt shouldn't be there. FDR should be there instead. But we're done talking about Theodore Roosevelt. FDR was actually a cousin. He was related to Theodore Roosevelt, and he did lots of good stuff, but he was a bit of a warmonger and an imperialist, and that doesn't sit well with me. FDR also did things that all presidents do things that we may not agree with or we don't admire. However, one thing that people don't realize is he was paralyzed because he had polio when he had a bad polio infection, and he lost the use of his legs. So he was in a wheelchair, but you'll rarely see any pictures of him in a wheelchair. You'll see a lot of pictures of him sitting down, but you won't see any pictures of him looking handicapped. He just looks like he's sitting in a chair, because the media was much kinder back then. But the significance of FDR is he was the president during the Great Depression. He proposed the New Deal. He rejuvenated the government. The biggest thing he did is comfort the people of the United States in the depth of economic depression. People had lost hope. One of the most famous things he ever said is that we have nothing to fear except for fear itself. He's a brilliant speaker. He's the first president to use radio. So he used to do, every week, he used to speak on the radio. And most people never saw the president in person. Televisions weren't around yet. So what you did is you turned on the radio and you listened to FDR speak. And he did these amazing, speeches that encouraged people to work hard and that things are improving. Don't worry, we got all these plans. And they were called fireside chats because, you could have the fire going and turn on the radio and sit down and relax and listen to your president, make a speech, kind of like an address to the union kind of thing. This is what Abraham Lincoln did in person. He stood up, because he was a giant, he stood up and he addressed large groups of people and made speeches, eloquent speeches that gave hope and encouragement and motivation to American people who were sometimes losing hope, despairing, he's just a charismatic leader. He led the government through the Great Depression into World War II. When World War II started, he argued he needed to continue to be president a third time, unlike any other president before that, because it's an emergency. He won, and then World War II was still going, so he ran a fourth time, and he won again. So then he was getting sick. He was not healthy, and he died. And Harry Truman was the president at the end of World War II. So he's unique for all those reasons. The New Deal, the way he used radio, his ability to give hope to American people, running 4 terms and winning. He was very, very popular. Some people hated him, like all presidents. There's a certain group of Republicans and conservative people that hated him, hated his guts. But he was a very popular president. In some of those 4 elections he won, he absolutely crushed. It's not like the last 30 years of American elections where it's like 51% to 49%. He was, sweeping. I think in one election he won like every state except for 2 or 3. Like, that doesn't happen anymore. No, nobody is that popular that they win all the states. You imagine looking at the map of America after the election and seeing, 3 red states and the whole country blue. I don't think I'll ever see that again. So that's FDR. Read this stuff over, but I'm just going to go over it. I told you already a little bit about Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the supreme commander in World War II. He became the first supreme Allied commander of NATO, and then he became the president. A more powerful military person there has never been, ever. It's almost like he got demoted when he became president. It's pretty insane. And yet, America has a tradition of keeping politics and military separate, thank God. So he resigned his military position, and then he did 2 terms as president. And of course, all countries were aware that this guy knew exactly what he was doing. He was a victorious ally in World War II. He was the head of NATO. Nobody really wanted to mess with him. Eisenhower's vice president was Nixon. He was a great card player. Read about Eisenhower. It's almost hard to imagine somebody filling the shoes of FDR being such a great president and leading everybody through World War II. But if anybody was going to be able to do it, it was Eisenhower. He was an amazing, talented individual. Kennedy is famous because he was a young, handsome guy. He was the first guy to do a television debate. He did it against Nixon, Richard Nixon, the guy who got in trouble for Watergate eventually. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president, and he lost to Kennedy by a tiny, tiny amount. And part of the reason was simply because Kennedy was handsome. I mean, I don't know what you think. Who's better looking, Biden or Trump? But it does matter on TV what you look like. And on TV, Kennedy looked young and handsome, and Nixon looked old and kind of sneaky and shady. And that didn't help. As far as his ideas were concerned and his policy, I think he was probably going to be a better president because of his experience working for Eisenhower. He was a very experienced politician, but John F. Kennedy won. But shortly thereafter, he was assassinated. Not shortly thereafter, a few years later, before the end of his term, Kennedy was shot in Texas. A lot of that had to do with the civil rights. You have to read that part in Chapter 7. There was a lot of unrest. There was a lot of tension between races, white people, black people, and he was in Dallas in Texas trying to get support, trying to get people to figure out a compromise, how that we could put in new laws that would promote equality and not offend, voters in the South that were hesitating on the issue of segregation. He was shot. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Malcolm X was shot. There was a bunch of assassinations of some of the leaders of civil rights. And the thing is, John F. Kennedy wasn't even super enthusiastic, but he realized that it had to happen. And then, he was killed. So a lot of people remember that as a traumatic event. He was succeeded by his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, but you don't have to remember him. You have to remember Nixon. Nixon, 2 things, basically. Watergate, he cheated. He spied on the Democrats, and he tried to win the election by cheating. He got caught. He ended up resigning. However, two other things that he's famous for. There's many things. His nickname used to be Tricky Dick. So he was sneaky, and he did swear a lot and say bad words. But he was the president who suddenly went to China and started to fix the relationship with United States and China. And he got a lot of. He was very good negotiating and diplomacy. He was very good internationally, handling the Russians, communicating with the Russians and the Chinese. I think I don't like him personally, and I don't like some of the things that he did. I think he hated hippies, he hated liberals. We're on the opposite side. I like liberals more than I like conservatives, but I respect the fact that he had good diplomatic skills, and that makes the world safe when you have a leader who can do that. So he gets respect for that, and he should. Spying on, the Watergate Hotel was a big mistake. I think he was going to win the election anyway. He was paranoid about losing, and he ended up getting caught. And so rather than getting impeached, he resigned, and his vice president became the president. So when Koreans use the word Watergate or something gate, they're referring to Richard Nixon. After Nixon, there was a guy called Jimmy Carter, and he was a great guy. I'm not going to mention him too much, but finally, Ronald Reagan, he's the one who begins this neoconservative era where even the Democrats are kind of, instead of this is the liberal consensus here, right? With Truman in between here and down through Kennedy. Kennedy starts to lose it, but Lyndon Johnson kind of gets it back. But remember the periods. Liberal consensus is World War II and afterwards, when everything's kind of going well. America wins the war, the economy is going well, and everything. The civil rights movement, when John F. Kennedy takes over, kind of causes friction, and the society starts to break down, and political disagreements increases, and the government starts to agree. Bipartisan issues. The war in Vietnam happens. The desegregation happens. The president is assassinated. Martin Luther. The civil rights movement was important because it improved the rights. It caused an amendment to the Constitution. It improved equality, but it was a very unstable period. So the liberal consensus ended. The civil rights, movement was the unstable period, and then the solution to that was for sort of all the liberals to move right. Even Clinton and Obama, for example, not so much Biden, but when I wrote this book, Biden was not a president yet. But the neocon era, like I said, it's a hyper intervention. They have bases all over the world. America's in Iraq. America's in Afghanistan. America's got bases everywhere. Hyper intervention. Globalization, trade, conservative values, and we'll see what happens with the next presidency, but it's not my job to predict the future. Chapter 8 has a few things about cultural features, things like 9/11, proliferation, the atom bomb, the new world order, some poems and stuff. Just this book is a textbook, but it's supposed to bring you up to the present and give you some the roots you need to study American culture more and British culture more, and to look at your own culture and see what things are important to you and what things you think represent. So there's a couple songs I recommend you to listen to. One's Rage Against the Machine, and the other one is Asian Dub Foundation. And in the end, on the last page, there's a great poem by Lord Alfred Tennyson. which is a beautiful poem about trust and doubt and war. And the history, as you can see, of America especially, but over the whole period of the course, there's been, death and taxes, there's been war and peace, there's been great leaders and bad leaders, and I don't want to overwhelm you with any more material, so just remember, stop at Reagan at the end of chapter 7. You don't have to even read about the incoming administration of Trump or Biden outgoing. Just stop on page 253. But everything else in the textbook goes before that, especially if I mentioned it on the board or I talked to you about it in class. And that is it for the semester. Thank you for taking the class, and I wish you the best of luck on the final exam. 40 multiple choice and 2 paragraph answers at the end, and that'll be it before winter vacation. Thank you for listening, and see you on Wednesday.